to take forward, and I really hope that progressives are prepared to lead this new step. But if this is the case, then we should be clear what is the kind of external action we need to develop if you really want to influence the management of migration. But in the meantime, we do need migration in the European countries. So let's discuss how can we have proper integration. And then we know that proper integration will depend most of all on our internal cohesion. We need to have much stronger internal cohesion among Europeans. We have a very worrying situation. Social inequalities have been increasing, even after the financial crisis. This is very disturbing. And we need to come with much more powerful instruments on the social, on economic policy to bring back cohesion to Europe. Well, I'm sure that everybody wants to also to listen about the Portuguese case, because this is a very inspiring case. I will speak about that. But then, I'm very sorry, I need to bring in our talk a last complicated issue, which can bring something very positive to improve our lives, but also some risks, and this is the digital revolution. We progressives, we really need to seize fully the implications of this, for good and for worse. And then the final point we will discuss about is, but how can we decide about all this? Can we really rely on our democratic institutions? Or are we coping with a fundamental crisis of democratic institutions? So this is in a nutshell the issues we will, it's not easy, in 1 hour and a half, but this is my pleasure to start with a big question, simple one, but very important for us, is the following. We have a new political landscape. We have been dealing with a conservative family who is responsible for the direction of Europe. They hold the main political posts. Let's be clear about that. They push for a destructive neoliberal agenda across the board. And because of that, people felt they were losing control and losing protection. And in face of this, we had a new movement now emerging in many countries, not here in Portugal, but almost in all the other countries, which is a movement driven by nationalistic, authoritarian, xenophobic reactions. Very worrying movement. And we need to tell them, you are completely wrong. You are pushing people to a disaster. And that's when we progressives, we need to come up with a full-fledged solution for protecting people and giving them back power on their lives. So I start with my first question, and this is my pleasure to address the question to Gesine Schwan. Gesine, great honor to have you here. Everybody know you, but you have a long, long track pushing for progressive ideas across Europe. I need to refer that you were chosen by SPD to be the candidate for President of the Federal Republic in Germany. So remarkable to have a woman in this endeavor. And you are now, beyond your professor responsibilities, you are now the chair of the Committee for Fundamental Values in SPD. So it's very important to listen to you. And I have a central question where we need to listen from you, is we call us progressives. But what is to be progressive in today's world?
Thank you very much, Maria Joao, and thank you for inviting me for this very interesting panel. Progressive as a term seems to be completely formal. You can progress in various directions, but you have to put it into the context of a concept of history, which was, of the concept of enlightenment, which was that history is going from one progress to the other, and the progress would go in the direction that the fundamental promise, namely that each individual has the same chance to live in freedom, to live in self-determination, to live in justice, would be implemented more and more. This is the, so to say, the content of progressism, that the individuals have the same right and the same chance to live in self-determination life. And so progressive is not anymore only formal, but has a content. Now, we are now in a situation where the idea of progressive is more and more questioned. First of all, because the idea that history has a positive orientation, has a positive aim, is not at all conceived and accepted anymore by many people. And you can make the different line between progressives on the one hand and conservatives or reactionaries who would think that this progress is a bad one and that we have to go back into an idea of national identity, etc. So I would make the main line between progressives and conservatives or reactionaries or nationalists that you do not believe, the others do not believe anymore in the same right of everybody to really have a chance for liberty, social, justice and solidarity. And then you have to elaborate that on the political system, the economic system, etc. But I think this is a fundamental line which goes together also with a kind of faith and into the future, with a kind of optimism for the future. And this is also an old experience that right-wing people and reactionary people, or authoritarian characters, as Adorno called that, have a rather pessimistic view on human beings and pessimistic view on history. This is a history of decline, this is a history of catastrophes, and the people in general are not worth to be trusted, but on the contrary have to be distrusted, and that goes on with much control, much top-down, much not really encouraging people, but on the other hand sanctioning in a negative way. The whole politic style of progressive would be to help, to support, to etc. And the whole style of conservatives, reactionaries, right-wing would be to suppress, to threaten, etc. I think this is the main line to define progressive people.
Mm-hmm. Very inspiring. Many thanks, Gesine. Look, let me now invite Andras Inotai, who is a remarkable intellectual in a difficult country today, Hungary. Mm-hmm. And I ask you to come, Andras, because of course I admire you, your work, but also because you are coming from a country which is now a big center of concern for all of us. Mm-hmm. Something really weird is happening there. But that's why I would like to hear the voice of a progressive intellectual from Hungary to tell us what is to be progressive. How do you feel about this?
Well, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm really very pleased to be here with you, and we have to share some of my views on what's progressive. First of all, I do not define progressive as left or right in a traditional sense. Progressive is definitely a different quality. It is not only value-based, that we have to defend the democratic values, but it is also a dynamic process. It is value-driven, on the one hand. Second, a progressive approach is looking to the future. We are facing a lot of challenges for the future, and we have to educate, and we have to have a dialogue with the young generation particularly, because it is about their future, it is your future, what will happen in such key issues as demography, as climate change, as education, as competitiveness, as migration, as how to fight nationalist tendencies, etc. All this is future-oriented. And Therefore, we have to make a lot of investment, what I call investment into the innovative society. This is crucial for the future. Nobody else, no other party, no other movement has up to now approached this issue. It did not come up. Here we can do something for and create a much higher support for the progressive forces in the next couple of years, because it is out of the 4-year political rationality of democracies. These are longer-term problems. They are 8, 10, 15 years strategies which will definitely define our future. And investment into the innovative society means that innovation is not a technological and not even an economic terminology. Innovation is deeply social. Only innovative societies will be able to successfully survive the 21st century. What does it mean, innovative? And then I will stop. It is open to the world and not closed. It is based on solidarity and not generating hate and discrimination. It is future-oriented and not going back to the past. It is preparing the society for adjustments which are necessary and flexibility, otherwise we will not be able to face the challenges, and not all the time telling the society that this cannot be done, this cannot be done, you have to go back to our home and shelter ourselves from all the changes. It is impossible. It would ruin us. And we have to have a cohesive society. Cohesion is extremely important in different, not only in economic and social terms, in cultural terms as well, against segmenting or dividing, sometimes deliberately, the different societies. So it is our historical task, and for the European Union, for us progressives, I think in Europe, we have the task and the responsibility to create or contribute in a very decisive way to the globalization, but globalization with one attribute, globalization with human face.
András, very powerful message coming from Hungary. And so now we are armed with two powerful concepts to compass for our talk today. We know what is to be progressive. We are inspired by this idea of social innovation, which is a very comprehensive idea. But now we have a problem. And we have a problem with the way the global order is evolving. So I address now a question to Mario Tello, another outstanding European intellectual, has been president of the Institute of European Studies in Université Libre de Bruxelles, but also the leading figure of a large network of experts across the world working on global governance issues. So, Mario, what can you tell, what is happening to the world? And what can Europe do about this? And you have 3 minutes to answer about this.
Question by $1 million. First of all, I thank the FEPS and the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, and particularly Maria Joao for inviting to share with you the outcome of 30 years of research in 5 continents I do by my job, and can maybe provide you with some information and some reflection about the question addressed by Maria, who since 20 years, I know her, she's bridging between the research community and the policy-making community. So thank you, Maria. Well, I think which is the main issue at stake? I think in next years, in the next decade, will be crucial. Either the world will move toward a fragmentation, toward power politics, toward a narrow understanding of nationalism, which is different from true patriotism, from hard nationalism, intolerant and aggressive nationalism, or the world will move toward what I call a new multilateral cooperation, concerned with environmental issue, with social justice, with cooperation in all the transnational issues the humankind is facing. This is the very issue at stake. And in my opinion, that is, we can provide the people with solid information about how dangerous, not only unpredictable, but more dangerous the world is becoming, but on the other hand, how many opportunities there are. So it's a rational message of hope I sending, provided a political condition. More cohesion, a more assertive role of the European Union as a political entity at global level, and secondly, a capacity of the European Union to be stronger against the arrogance like Trump, Erdogan, and Putin, and to maybe to more respectful interregional partners with the weaker Latin Americans, with Africans and Asian partners. So this is the crucial, difficult dilemma we are facing in the next year. And if I have 30 seconds, I would say the danger is not only about a militarized multipolarity, which we have to stop toward a European Union role, toward a new multilateralism, but the danger is also about a new bipolar world. What I'm looking is that both in the United States and in China, some powers, powerful lobbying, are emerging. We wish to transform the trade wars into a military confrontation. That will be terrible for the European Union because we are a civilian power. We cannot cope with a military challenge. And that, I think we should take care of the fact that Steve Bannon, the most important advisor to Donald Trump, moved to Europe, is trying to collect by his new movement, Salvini, Le Pen, Orban, and all the new nationalists toward a priority against China. That is the new idea. Even Bolsonaro in Brazil said that his priority is against China as predator. So the very danger is militarized multipolarity, or even worse, a bipolar world which would really marginalize the European Union. Through the stronger political union, we can cope with this challenge. But this is should be in the agenda of progressive forces.
Thank you very much, Mario. This is a very important wake-up call for the new situation we are dealing with in international front. But now let me tell you something. Of course, Europe needs to work to influence these interaction between the big powers. But we also need to have a straight look to our closer neighborhood. We need to set a new relationship with neighborhood. We talk about a real partnership with Africa. This is one of the examples. This will be crucial as such because this is our closest continent, and a lot remains to be done in this area. But there is also a second reason. It's because we understand now this will be also crucial for us to manage properly migration. And then I'm coming with the difficult question, because we know that migration has been, over the last years, an extremely divisive issue in the European political landscape. And we progressives, we are calling for a holistic approach. Yes, we need to work with the origin countries. Yes, we need to build up a European border based on our values. But most of all, we need to have a progressive approach about integration. Integration of migrants, because we do need migration. And here comes the difficult question, because this issue is very divisive. And so, Gesine, I will ask you now, again, because you have an outstanding work on this. what do you think should be the progressive approach to deal with integration of migrants?
First of all, I would like to underline that integration is a necessary procedure in politics in modern society, even if there were not one refugee or one migrant. It is anyhow necessary because our societies are very divided and are very individualized. So I would really make that clear. The integration of refugees, of people from other cultures, is just one subgroup, so to say, of a general need of integration, and we have to take that into account. When I started political science in the 60s last century, this was one of the democratic pluralistic society theories. We learned from the beginning that we have to integrate. That means that we have to come together and to find common purposes and also to find a fundamental consensus about what we have really in common and where we have political differences. Both are important. Now, concerning the special group, so to say, migrants are very often as the poor in our country, those who are underprivileged. And it is very dangerous and totally against progressive ideas to play one group against the other and say, so the underprivileged in our country have to be privileged against the underprivileged of the other countries. We have to show and to find ways to show that both underprivileged in the global sense and in our national or intra-society sense have to find in common a way to get out of that situation of being underprivileged. And it is not true that our poor people would have a profit if the other poor people would be put aside also Europe. Now, we have a problem in Europe that it is difficult, given the interior, the domestic situation of so many countries and the split situation in the domestic societies, it is difficult to find a solidary way to integrate and to welcome refugees as well and migrants. This is two categories. Refugees are compelled, so to say, to leave their country. Migrants normally leave them voluntarily, but of course there are gray zones between them. And I totally plead, also after the experiences we have in during the last 3 years at least, that means between 2015, to find a voluntary solidarity in Europe, not a compulsory one, because that will not work, neither in Western countries nor in Central European countries. To have a voluntary solidarity based on municipality initiatives, strengthening, empowering municipalities where the integration has really takes place, and combining that with 2 points. One, with the positive, also financial incentives for new investment, which we need anyhow, and to combine it with participation of the citizens. And that means if we could make it, and there's no law to be changed, if we have a common European fund, as we have other funds for other purposes, and to say, okay, this is an integration and common development fund for municipalities. And municipalities should come together and ask what will be our development, what integration of refugees or migrants could play a positive role in that development, participatory, taking together companies, taking civil society, organized civil society, taking together with politics, and then defining this is our way, and we would offer so many posts. We do that already in a number of our municipalities in Europe and also in Germany, if we need, for instance, people for demographic reasons. So do that, and then for instance, a coalition of the willing, an enhanced cooperation, as we have it in the European law, could say, okay, 8 countries decide we have a common asylum policy, we have a common procedure, a quick one, a transparent one, and then we promise to, for instance, a center in Spain or in Portugal or in France or in Germany, that those who are accepted will be not distributed but welcomed decentrally, I would say, in Europe, and the municipalities can apply for having refugees. This is a totally different logic if this is a voluntary procedure, and I'm totally sure that even in Poland, which I know quite well, there are many municipalities and towns, and they have declared that openly, who would like to welcome it. It's just the national government which doesn't like it, who would like to welcome it. And if you have the incentive and say, okay, you find out the integration costs for refugees, and then you add, if you decide to have a number of refugees, you add the same amount of money which you need for the integration to the general development, investment, etc. in the municipality, so that there is no competition between those who arrive, the underprivileged from outside and the underprivileged from inside. And to avoid that competition, to can really make that new initiative, anyhow we know investment, we need investment, and to change the migration question from a kind of crisis into a chance, an opportunity. This is an idea I have inherited from Maria Joao about 2 or 3 years ago. I still remember the situation in a workshop when she explains that on the level of national states. I do not believe that national governments will be in state to really do it. I think municipalities have to do it. But national governments have to make, so to say, an umbrella. They have, from the point of view of law, they have to decide who comes into the country and who not. And then we could really find a solidarity approach. And I promise that once it is established and once one can see the good advantage for investment, for development, and for participation, participatory development, more and more municipalities will be willing and wanting to do that. And so it is not just now a coalition once forever of 8 countries. It will progress. It will be progressive also in that sense. It will have a progress into including more countries, and then we have really a voluntary solidarity movement. This is what we need.
Gesine, this seems indeed a very promising approach. It's a different way to deal with the integration. And you made a very important point. I felt that we need to show this needs to go hand in hand with powerful solutions to strengthen cohesion for all European citizens. Because if all European citizens, they feel in a better life, of course, everybody will collaborate with this. It's much easier. Which brings us to the central issue, which is exactly this one. What can you tell about the state of social cohesion in Europe? Because the European project was designed and launched exactly to build cohesion among Europeans, starting with peace, but then economic and social cohesion, territorial cohesion. There is a long track. Of course, we remember the golden days of Delors with a big budget combining with the single market. But then something worrying happened. And I would identify this particularly starting with the financial crisis in 2008, because until then we were all of us engaged on a strategy which was defined here, the Lisbon strategy to provide smarter, inclusive growth, energy transition. We were in this track, and then everything was broken. Financial crisis, Eurozone crisis, big divergences coming, some countries under a Troika program. And only more recently, we start reversing this trend. So that's where I believe the Portuguese case is particularly interesting as a central moment to reverse this trend. And I'm very pleased to have with us our Minister of Social Affairs, who has been an outstanding European and Portuguese politician, minister of several governments. And now he was part of this socialist team putting an end in austerity in Portugal. And everybody is asking, how is this being possible? So, Antonio, what can you tell us about this? José Antonio.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here with you, all of you, and in this school. It's also my school. let me tell you three simple things, simple ideas. First of all, I want to speak a little about what is the playing field we are dealing at a European level. Not European, global level. And I think Jacinthe said something very important some minutes ago. We are fighting against nationalism, against extreme right parties and movements, about movements, Eurosceptic movements. Well, we are dealing about perceptions of the future. And we are dealing about the use of fear as a political weapon. People are afraid of the future because they don't know if their children, the next generation, will have the same opportunities that we have. And this, some of us have. And this is fueling, is increasing the role and the opportunities of the extreme right and nationalism all around Europe. And that's why is in that playing field we must fight. Also in social issues. At the end of the day, social issues is the main area where people find reasons to choose their political options. And I think, the second idea, I think it's very important not to talk about European social policies, but talk about the social dimension of European policies. Mm-hmm. The main mistake that our political family did some years ago was to allow that, the market decide the major things, and the social policies is like a band-aid in the short term to solve some critical problems. It was a huge mistake, and now we are paying the price of that. We need to have the social approach in all the European policies, financial policies, trade policies, fiscal policies. And that, for me, is the second big question. If you want, I can tell you, in my opinion, the positive results of the Portuguese policy is strongly linked with that option to combine fiscal policies with social policies. Perhaps the main social policy in Portugal in the last 3-4 years was to understand that recovering wages, having a different fiscal policy, is the better way to have social gains, social positive effects. And the third idea I want to emphasize, because we have only a few minutes, is that when you are talking about social policy, our political family must reinvent some kind of jobs regulation. The link between jobs, wages, and social protection can't be undermined. If we allow that, we are going to lose the DNA of our political background. And that is the main when we are talking about social issues, is the main challenge that we are facing now at the European level in the European Council. Yesterday we have a Council of the European Affairs, the Social Affairs, and we saw there how difficult it is now to reinvent that idea. Of course, we are going to discuss that. We have a tremendous technological mutation over our heads, but that can't avoid that we put in the center of our policies that kind of golden triangle: jobs, wages, social protection.
José Antonio, I'm very pleased that you are underlining these and this powerful idea that the social dimension should be strengthened across the board in all the policies. This is the progressive way to go, for sure. And the final point you made, yes, we progressives, we need to provide for all Europeans, all people living in Europe, a powerful law ensuring that everybody has a decent labor contract and everybody has full access to social protection over the life cycle. Let me tell you, I know that yesterday the discussion in the Council of Ministers was very difficult. From the European Parliament, now I'm speaking with my hat of the Vice President of SND, we got a victory because this directive to improve working conditions was supported by 400 members of the European Parliament against 200. And let me point the finger to the 200, because the 200 are exactly these conservatives, neoliberals, who think this is not necessary. But how come it is not necessary when we have such an amount of precarious work and when we are moving now to a new phase of the digital revolution with millions of people working for online platforms, crowd work? These online platforms sometimes saying, well, we are just a technical platform. No way. They are corporations. They are companies. They should have corporate social responsibility. So we progressives, I believe we should really update our agenda to make the best of this digital revolution. We are not afraid of this. We are progressives, but we want to shape it. So now I come with my question.
Let me add
Yes.
one simple thing.
Yes.
Yesterday, one of the main discussions was about social protection for all workers, including self-employed workers. And it was not possible in a recommendation, not a directive, in a recommendation of the Council, it was not possible to find a consensus that the social protection in sickness and employment for self-employment must be mandatory and not voluntary. And that, well, is
For us, it's unacceptable.
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 But we need to try to discuss a little more between us about that.
So very good point indeed. But this is pushing us to another difficult question, very big challenge for us progressives, is how can we drive this new phase of the digital revolution? We have with us Gustavo Cardoso, full professor here in the Institute, but also an outstanding expert exactly on these digital revolution issues. He's part of this group working at world level with Manuel Casas and others, who has been behind our inspiration. But now, Gustavo, we need again your help. How should we deal with this?
Well, thank you, Maria João. Thank you all that are here present for the invitation also. Well, first I believe that we need to acknowledge something, which is our everyday life is different from our everyday life when we were born many years ago. And we try to put it as digital, but in reality our everyday life now is different because of the digital. So we put the digital because that is something that we need to call difference. The difference comes from the digital. It comes because our way in which we relate to our families has changed in terms of work, in terms of education, in terms of politics, everything. And we must also acknowledge that we tend to make a specific mistake when we deal with policy and politics, talking with digital. The idea that this is a realm isolated, that this is an independent variable that is not related to all other variables, it's a mistake and has brought us many problems along the years. So the first thing that I would say is that we need to acknowledge difference. Difference comes from the digital. Departing from that, it is possible to redesign and to place ourselves differently. Otherwise, we will always be in this idea that there is something different that we don't understand is happening, and we need to get ahead of it and determine exactly how things will develop. And I think that is always a mistake that we have been bringing into our, so it's like, let's see how we deal with digital campaign. Let's see how we deal with digital work. Work is different because the digital is there. Politics is different because the digital is there. So let's acknowledge that we are living in a different world in which we have coined as terms as a network society, and the idea is that we organize ourselves differently. We organize ourselves differently in terms of family, in terms of work, in terms of education, in terms of politics, in terms of entertainment, in terms of every single dimension in our everyday life. So that is our departure point. The second is that if we consider ourselves progressives, if we have discussed here that this has got to do with a specific view of life and values that come along, we need to have a progressive agenda that brings the digital in. And that is the difficult part, because we have the tools and we have been addressing the digital as a specific realm in economics. Okay, so we have specific policies for that. We have specific policies in terms of work, in terms of wages for the digital. I think that if we wish to give the Europeans a glimpse of their future, we need really to start thinking differently and look to work, to education, and everything as something different. Let's bring the digital in. Let's say that this is the difference, and then let's move forward in terms of what we aim as our outcome. So there are different issues here. I think that we need also to acknowledge that there is a Chinese model of dealing with these changes in life, which has to do with increasing the power of the state, increasing the control over citizens, that there is an American model that we know very well, and that we need to look at our values, European ones and progressive ones, and see how can we try to shape our future in terms of our everyday life. We can call it a progressive digital agenda. I think there is an European way that is in the middle between China and the US. This is a very simplified version.
Can you explain about
Okay, we have the tools of the state, but we don't think of the state as the final goal in terms of managing everyday life of people. So it's not the power of the state that has to be increased by every policy. No, in Europe we look at people, how can we bring a better life to each one of us, and how can we discuss what a better life is. But at the same time, we have another approach towards the US, because we use the tools that the US gives us. Our digital life is increasingly being shaped, our everyday life is increasingly being shaped by applications, and then the applications are brought by corporations which are US-based. It's something I find striking, is that the only way in which we have been able to implement public policy to deal with the challenges brought by the digital to our everyday life is with competition policy, because that is the only kind of tool that the big monopolistic companies like Facebook or like Google understand, and that's the only way in which we have been able to get some kind of balance between our view of what things should be in terms of privacy, in terms of work, in terms of taxes and everything. It has been through competition policy.
But for us progressives, we can think about a kind of industrial policy, no?
Yes, and so that is when I'm talking about a progressive digital agenda, is to look at all the things, all the issues, all the questions that we have around us, and look at a different way of looking at these things. It's not just the market, it has to be a glimpse of what our common future should be. And this is, and I will end with this, the real problem for us has always been, we have politicians and we have people. How can we build the same common language between politicians and people? And that common language is public policy, the design of a public policy that makes sense for everyday life of our people, and not just for the big players in the ground.
Yes, very good. And applause to your statement. Yes, we might have a progressive and a European way to deal with this, to drive the digital revolution. But then we come to your last point, which is democracy. Because something worrying is happening with our democratic institutions. So we need also to rethink this. We have very worrying trends. The last development I will refer to is what is happening right now in France with the Gilets jaunes, which is dealing with the crucial issue of combining tax fairness with transition, energy transition. By the way, in the next conference this morning, we'll deal this strongly because we have a SND report on this issue. But we understand that our democratic institutions are not prepared to deal with such a complex transition. So something is wrong here. And now I'm coming back again to Gesine. How do you think we should reshape our democratic institutions in such a way that we have not only multi-level, but participation, much higher participation? What do you think about this?
The fundamental challenge is that in that very enhanced change challenge we have in the digital world, but also in other worlds, we have to bring together these changes, not to become reactionary and build walls, mental ones or physical ones, and at the same time to overcome fear and to have some control for everybody. And that means to bring together transition, the digital, but other ones too, in the economic life, to climate transitions, to quit coal mining and all that stuff, to bring it together with, again, the individual right of freedom. And that means a certain fundamental security, not just to leave that out. As you said about those who are working by themselves, they have the unemployed employ themselves, that they would be sure. Security, participation, and openness for the future. And if we consider that these changes are extremely complex, I think participation, democratic participation, equal chance of participation leads us to very decentralized procedures of participation. The participation would be important for all these new production lines which are not anymore locally fixed, which are somewhere in the heavens, so to say, with the internet, but which bring together people, which are social. And security can only be brought about if we overcome the extreme lack of equality or the unequal power and also ownership whatsoever, especially in this new economy of digitalness. That means, I think, I'm not that much thinking in categories of plebiscites, national or other ones. I'm thinking much more in terms of local and professional and labor co-determination and participation. Politically, for instance, on the municipality level with this multi-stakeholder point, but also within new forms of production which don't have any, which are not tied anymore to localities, but which are situated somewhere else and collecting data. This is a complete different model of production. Decentralized participation so that people also can understand better because participation is also a process of education and self-education. If you participate and you understand where you participate, you learn, you know, you are not afraid anymore. You have a certain amount of control of what you are doing. You don't feel disempowered, as many people now feel. So decentralized participation in the labor field, in the living, daily life, living municipality field, but then, of course, also on the more collective levels, that means national or global ones. And we will have probably to combine a much more complex multi-level governance, which is not anymore just community and then region and then national state and then Europe and then global. This is very clear and hierarchical, etc. It's more complex. But on the other hand, we also learn in our service, for instance, that people who are busy in participation, also on the smaller levels, have much more trust into democracy than those who stay away. So you can have a kind of surplus, so to say, even if it is a locally limited participation. They know the mechanism, they know what is happening there. It's not anymore so enigmatic, it's not so hostile anymore, but it's more used and then to spread it. So I would very much plead concerning Europe for empowering municipalities financially and personally, because we all know now that municipalities are the way how to really bring people together, but they don't want it for the moment. That's what I'm learning from Germany, because they don't have the financial and the personal power for it. It's very, very simple. They don't have the persons to write for applications, etc. They need much more power of that. And therefore, I think we need also a kind of redistribution towards a more decentralized way to take part in public life, to participate and to co-determine, so that people could feel that they are really equally equal right citizens. They are citizens, and this is what we need to make them live and to make them experience.
Thank you. Gesine, many thanks for these, again, inspiring ideas on new avenues to develop participation in Europe. And now, well, we need to go to the most challenging moment of our high-level conversation, which is the moment where, after having this overview, which is just, I would say, an appetizer for what we can do with the FEPS network. You should know that FEPS network is bringing about these ideas in large scale with all the partner foundations. This is indeed a powerful, progressive network we have. So this was only an appetizer. But now I would like to invite a good group of young leaders over there, which are there, to come with their remarks, with their ideas, with their questions. And I give you the floor one by one. We have, I think, a very good gender balance, so this is a good sign. So I would like to start with one with the ambition to make a small provocation to Mario Tello about what is today's world. Who is in charge of this world? What is happening to the world?
First of all, I want to thank you for this great initiative, my annual dialogue, following up on it, promoting it constantly. I think it's a great thing we can all learn from. I will go straight to the point. We've read the report.
Introduce yourself, because it's important.
My name is Casper van Poeken. I'm from Belgium, and I'm ES Vice President for International Affairs and Human Rights. 77% of millennials believe the EU don't do enough to protect the environment and climate. Some suggest even a special European court to defend our climate, just as we have with human rights. At the same time, I think the credibility of the EU is at stake in this matter, especially with young people who seem to lose their trust in the project if they don't see an EU able to tackle this challenge. Now, for my surprise, only a narrow majority of the young people want more common EU voice, except for this matter. There's a huge exception for climate. We found in the findings in the report. So at the same time, we want to make it clear that it should be available to everyone, the transformation. Like with the Gilets jaunes, we should make sure that there's no new division, no new inequalities, when we make this transformation possible for everyone. So I was wondering, how would you tackle this challenge for young people? How would you see the trust growing back and make it an opportunity for the EU to tackle the problem on the European level?
Mario.
Thank you very much. I think that the lesson comes from Brussels for one time. We have had a few days ago 75,000 people demonstrating in Brussels for a better environmental governance. And that is the message of young people participation by making a European foreign policy, external relations. The European role in the world should become a priority in the European agenda, because we have this most beautiful narrative in the world, reconciliation between previous enemies through economic integration and regional model of social cohesion. But we should, in crucial topics like environmental protection, like trade arrangements, and you have had an experience in Belgium, I know very well because Paul Magnette is my pupil. He was able to lead a protest movement revising part of the CETA arrangement with Canada. At the end of the story, he signed it. So it was a constructive criticism of the trade arrangements. We need these trade arrangements because they are the best way. We have to export our standard of life, our values, environmental values, social values, and a public way to set the conflicts in trade. Even with China, we are now negotiating a bilateral investment treaty, including the labor standards with China. So these trade arrangements are crucial. And I think this can also be matter of a mobilization, of enthusiasm. We have to really, I think the young people should be a driver of a large alliance against the protectionism, for an open Europe, as Inotai said, for let me say, a high quality of the standards exporting our model in other parts of the world. This is crucial in order not to be isolated. If we are isolated, we will be deleted as a social model. It's a crucial aim and soul of the European foreign policy. The coherence with the very soul of the European model in trade, environmental policy, and so on. So I think we should learn from Portugal. We are only 7% in Europe of the global population, but Portugal is a small country, but had a huge global influence in Africa, Latin America, Brazil, and Asia. So it's possible to do it by great ideas, regulating globalization, environmental terms, social terms, by large mass participation and discussing with the people about that, mobilizing people, and the people enthusiasm about European role in the world.
Yeah. Very good. Yeah. On this, very inspiring. We need to go to a next shot on migration, but I know that Andras wants to come in also on this. Let's make it like that. We have a young leader with a precise question on migration.
Yeah, that's me.
That listen to you, but then I'll give you the floor and you answer to you comment what you want to say. Yes, yeah, and introduce yourself, please.
Hi, I'm Michelle Rauschkolb, and I'm the International Secretary of Jusos Germany. So this is a very SPD conversation right now, and I'm also, yes, Vice President. And what we see from the Millennial Report, what we see in the Millennial Report that was published by FEPS is that young people very much are aware that there needs to be a European solution for the migration question, or what I would call like the solidarity crisis in Europe. And now Gesine has talked about her idea of the progressive cities and communes. And I think this is a very good idea because it, on the one hand, it helps to support those people who need protection. And on the other hand, it also makes sure that we as like social democrats, as socialists, reclaim the stage on this topic, because right now I feel that our party family is very much hesitant to talk about this topic, because yes, we also have to talk about social security and climate change, but migration, we have to talk about this. We cannot just leave it to like the right wing, like to the fascists. Sorry, we just cannot, because it's in our DNA. It's one of the values, equality, that our movement is based on. Yeah, so my question would be, we're talking here about European elections and about the programs, but I don't feel that the like progressive city idea is somewhere in the program, and I feel our party family is very much divided on this. So my question would be, how can we bring our party family together and spread this idea and mobilize for this idea? Because I think it needs to be heard more, it needs to be talked about more.
Gesine, can you react, and then Andreas, please?
Yeah. Well, I have the impression that on the European level, even social democrats and socialists have taken the point. As far as I see, your program for the election hasn't yet been published.
Yes.
But I have been informed about what is being prepared. And so I see very clearly that this point to empower municipalities in general is in it, and also in context with migration, because the departure are the sustainability goals. This is what you take as a point of departure, and their migration is, of course, in. I also know positively that the Greens have included it in Germany for their election program. So I would like to wish that our social democrats would take a social democratic idea and then put it forward. It's more on the national level that they are very hesitating. But I think, and I'm preaching them nearly every 2 days, that if you tie it to participation, that the citizens can co-determine, in a way also veto, if migrants come into their municipality. You will have a progress because with an incentive you will have sufficient municipalities who want it. And therefore, I think we have to really clearly tie it to participation. And therefore, I would say there is a chance, slowly but step by step, like progressive politics always are, you can do it. I would like to add one simple point. To get out, or to find a turn for ecological policy and for the climate, you have to see that inequality is tied extremely negatively to climate change. You see it with the Gilets jaunes. In general, to have a higher tax for climate is okay, but if there is such an inequality in the society, you will have opposition, and that is true for every chance. So the young people have not only been full of enthusiasm for their future, which is understandable and good, but they have also to understand that you can only promote a better climate policy if you in the same time overcome the inequalities and find solutions for those who in a concrete way are losers. We are all winners if we battle climate change, but there are concrete losers in regions, in certain parts. I know it in Germany, but it's the same for other countries. And there, I think the social democratic or the progressive policy has an enormous chance, also in comparison with the Greens, whom I love. I have no problem with the Greens, but enormous advantage if they tie and they explain. You can only implement a good climate policy if you overcome at the same time inequality, and if you find concrete strategies of exit, concrete strategies how to overcome in our region that Lausitz, how to find a better future for people who live there, not just how to be protective that they would have some social security. No, a better future, a more important future. This is what social democrats have now to do, and it's always participation. It's always participation to include.
Not to be late, hopefully, I would like to make a couple of comments on several issues. First, I fully agree with you that Europe has to be a global player, and not only in economic issues, but also concerning also in political security and value issues. It is very important. Generally, previously, we used to have 3 different scenarios for Europe: deepening the integration, muddling through, or disintegration. I would like to make it clear here. Muddling through is not possible anymore. Either we will be deepening the integration, whether it is 27, 27 plus, 27 minus, it's another question, or we will be disintegrated and Europe will practically disappear from the map of the 21st century. That is our common responsibility. Second remark. Climate change has been, I fully agree that it is really the 24th hour we are in. And physical contamination, physical pollution, how to prevent it, how to eliminate it is an absolute priority. But I would like to add something more, which it is at least as important to prevent mental contamination. Not only physical, because it may turn out that mental contamination will create or will lead in a shorter period, a shorter time to a catastrophe than physical contamination. That's the second point. The third one, digitalization. There are 2 different views. The overwhelming view is that this is practically Industry 4.0. This is the next industrial revolution. There is another approach which I am convinced is the right one and much broader. So the challenges are much bigger than we think at the moment. It is, some people say, we are at the threshold of the 3rd revolution of human history. The first was the language, when we understood each other. The second was the script, where we could also write down the experience of the others, and now we know exactly how, what kind of changes, what kind of revolutionary changes both the common language and then the script have created. And today, with 8 billion people absolutely interconnected, we cannot imagine what kind of economic, social, cultural, mental, etc., challenges are ahead of us. So it is by far not a technological issue. It is, and not even a social one. It is what is at stake, whether we will be able to manage this situation in a way that will ensure the future of mankind, or we will kill each other. Last remark, one issue of social cohesion has not been mentioned, and I think it is very important. There is a lot of discussion about income polarization, etc. I think it is wrong. What we are witnessing is not so much income polarization, it is also true, but it is wealth polarization. And wealth polarization, to some extent, is the positive outcome of 3 generations without war in Europe. Wealth could be accumulated before. If wealth started to be accumulated from one generation to the other, we immediately had a war in Europe, or we had a crisis for both of them. And it was practically eliminated. Now we have 3 generations with accumulated wealth. The question is, how can we use this accumulated wealth for longer-term programs for the mankind in general and for the European Union in particular? I mean, how to use this money and this wealth for strengthening the democratic foundations, for creating more solidarity, for having common projects to be financed from part of this wealth, for our public goods, etc., etc. Of course, it should be a voluntary contribution, but it is much more. What we need is a mental development for many, many people. What are the priorities? It is not personal richness. It is how can we make richer Europe, and as a global, if we are a global player, also other parts of the world. Thank you.
Very good, Andras. You are raising fundamental points. This is a full research program for FEPS and for progressives. But let me bring now back the discussion to the digital revolution. And we have with us João Albuquerque, who is the president of our Young European Socialists. And João, please join us in our talk.
Well, thank you very much, Maria João, for the invitation, for organizing this and putting such a brilliant panel of speakers. I was taking some notes during the interventions, and I really believe that if we miss the train of facing and tackling the digital revolution that it's coming, it's going to happen as it happened before in other contexts of our policies, which is the right is going to take over and going to implement their own speech. We can see this, for example, with the universal basic income. We haven't discussed this, or we are trying to discuss it, but the right wing is already leading the discussion and proposing their model, which means that if we don't take appropriation of this debate and of the digital revolution as a whole, then we will end up with a proposal that is led by the liberals and by the right wing, which means that the proposal that will be normalized will be their proposal, not ours, not serving the people and the rights of the people. In this case, what I wanted to ask you, specifically, Gustavo, is regarding the digital revolution. How do you think that, how can we as socialists and social democrats present proposals for young people especially, because they are going to be the ones more affected by this revolution, and that changed the whole concept of work and of jobs, and with this we changed the whole society and the way that we live in it as a community. How can we propose young people a different future and a different approach to this uncertain times?
Okay.
Gustavo,
okay.
This is for you.
It's a tough question because, as always, we can try to shape the future, but we are not able to predict exactly how things will evolve. But I would say that first we will need to understand that currently we have two kinds of currency going on. One is the euro, the second one is reserve or privacy. And that is something that we must acknowledge and put forward in terms of our concerns in designing public policy. Privacy, that is, we are paying every service in the digital world with the same logic as in the Pacific Islands we would use shells from the sea to pay. So we are paying with our own data. We are paying services with our data, and that is something that we have been trying with the approach to privacy and the GDP and so on. But we really need to put on the focus, because that is something that people really think about and they have a concern about. It's their life. It's their own freedom, not to be in the hands of a third part, either the state or private companies. Besides that, I think that we, as progressives, we should acknowledge that we cannot leave the world of entrepreneurship and startups and so on the conservative side or the liberal side. We have to promote it also and put the progressive values on that approach. That is to say that everything that it is new, everything that is coming out of the digital transformation in economics, in politics and so on, has to be labeled also as progressive. That means that we have to speak the same language as the people which are doing those things. We have to tell them and make them understand that a part of what they are building, a part of what they are designing has progressive values there, and that we are with them, and we want to help them to put that on the agenda also. One important, very important thing that combines what we have been here discussing is democracy. We must also bring into the discussion that fake news and the discussion about fake news is destroying the world of journalism and media. And there cannot be democracy without good journalism and good media companies around. So I would also like to say that as a progressives, we need to say that what we are discussing is a new dimension of propaganda. It's not about fake news. News is another realm. What we are here looking is the return of the old propaganda times, the ones before the Berlin Wall fell. And this is also, so it's about measures, but it's also about the language, the way in which we communicate, the way in which we talk to the citizens. So it's about designing policies, but also telling people that we speak their language. We are looking at them as our fellow citizens, not as someone that have this strange idea about using the digital. No, the digital is for, look, I'm old. I'm 49. I'm old in terms of the generation. So for my students, I have, because they were born after the Berlin Wall fell. So when I'm teaching here in this institution in the morning, my students have no idea of the events that build my own background in terms of the world. So they are in another perspective. They no longer remember that phones were connected to a wall with a line. So that is something that they never saw, never thought. They only looked at it in films, if in the cinema, if something like that happened. So we need to understand that we, the old ones, need to look at them, at what they are doing. And we need to encourage them to do whatever serves their own generation, because we can help them, but we no longer know exactly what's best for them. So let's change the way in which we communicate, because that is fundamental. And we have a generational gap here, because we were born under a mass communication world, and the kids today were already born in a networked communication world. So that is what we progressives also should acknowledge. Differences, cultural ones between us, the old, and the younger ones, need to be addressed also, and we need to listen to them. Right.
Very well. Many thanks for this talk, João and Gustavo, but João also raised fundamental issues on implications for the social, the living, the working conditions. And I know that Elisa Gambardella wants to come in with another question. So Elisa, let's start with you now, and I'll ask José Antonio to reply.
Thank you. The recent FEP study over the millennials' vision for Europe clearly showed that millennials are progressives along the lines of your definition of what being progressive means. And it shows indeed that 83% believe that the EU should ensure a minimum wage for everyone working in the European Union. 59% think that the EU should ensure and contribute to fair unemployment benefits for all Europeans. And 81% are convinced that the EU should be involved in providing financial aid to children. So they're clearly progressives, and there is clearly a strong call for social investment. So my question is, as clearly our parties and our movement need millennials to be in, first of all, to be able to implement the social agenda, and secondly, to have a future as such. My question is, do you believe that we should embrace more clearly, more unmistakably, an agenda based on social investment? And do you believe that by doing so, we would be able to count again on the support of young generations?
Thank you very much. Well, if the young generations are not putting the social standards as a priority of the European Union, we are losing the battle. If, of course, I agree that I understand when young generations put the environmental agenda at the first place, but there is a social, as we heard, a social dimension of environmental issues, environmental challenge. The same way there is a social challenge when we are talking about digitalization. Well, I don't want to create here a debate about digitalization and the role of China, Europe, and the States, but I think that's not only the questions of competition that can explain the differences between different players around the world. It's also the question of social standards when you are talking about digitalization and technological change and robots and any other things. Because if you look at the past, all the major achievements after the Industrial Revolution were technological, but also social. Yeah. Industrial Revolution was the steam engine and forbidden the child labor. The second industrial revolution was, of course, the mass production, but also the 40 hours of labor. There's always a link between the social standards, the social challenges, and the technological evolution. And that's why that if you look at long term, the technical progress was mainly a positive effect in jobs and progress, human progress in history. We don't know, we are not sure by the dimension, because of the dimension of the nature of the current mutation, if in the future will be the same.
Yeah.
But we are sure that if you look at the world, the winners and the losers are not going to be the same that in the past. So that's why Europe must play a role also in the social issues. And social standards around the world. As Europe did about the environmental standards with positive results. But let me tell you, I don't know if it will be possible to Europe to play a role in that sense without create the conditions for European citizens to have confidence in Europe. The first step to succeed at a global level is to rebuild the confidence in Europe. Let me tell you, in 1 minute, a story following the words of Gustavo. For us, it's difficult to 1 minute. A simple story. In the 70s of the last century, after the 70s and 80s, after the democratic revolution in Portugal, we discussed the question of being a part of what we call now the European Union. And the main reason, the main tool that for those that propose that approach was, well, being a part of the European Union is the better way to preserve the quality of our, in that time, recent democracy. And I ask all of you, nowadays, are we sure if that argument, that reason is still the main reason to be a part of the European Union? I have some doubts. And the question you put, well, I think that for the young people, putting the social standards, putting the access to a job, I don't want to, we don't have time. It was very interesting to discuss the questions like the universal basic income. But in my opinion, it's only my opinion, our main priority is to rebuild the right to have a job, to have a social protection, to have access to public goods. I don't see as progressive a society with broken into parts those that have the possibility to have a job and those that live with some kind of social revenue, social income. So it is a question to debate, but in that debate, we need all generations, and of course, the millennials are a part of our common answer to that problem. And it's, for us, of other generations, it's a pleasure to see you here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Very interesting statement, and these leads us to the final question. I need to give the floor to Maria Freitas and Jutta, because they are coming with important questions based on the recent research we conducted, the last survey to the millennials. A very, very interesting survey was launched with many conclusions, and among the conclusions, also something about democracy. What is the kind of democracy millennials are looking for? Tell us.
Good morning, everybody. Maria Freitas here, FEPS Policy Advisor, Portuguese, but living and working in Belgium already for 6 years. And I've also coordinated the Millennial Dialogue Project on behalf of FEPS, a great youth engagement initiative that FEPS realized with its partners in 10 European countries, where we surveyed 10,000 young people on their expectations and aspirations towards the European Union. On democracy and on the value of the European Union, our millennials were very strong. We were all very strong. We support the European Union. 80% of millennials said that they value very much the European Union. However, they also expressed fear in saying that perhaps the European Union is not going in the right direction. With regards to democracy as well, we came to understand that millennials want to feel connected to the EU and have their voices heard. So my question to you is, how is then the progressive movement preparing itself with tools or with methods to enable a stronger participation of this generation, because we are a generation that matters. We are a generation that makes roughly 1/4 of Europe's population. So we matter for politics. We matter for European elections. And so my question to you is, how is then the progressive family enabling the millennial generation to have a stronger say and to be really, really part?
Very good. And Tulia, do you want to join us now?
Thank you very much. My name is Tuulia Pitkänen, and I am the Secretary General of Young European Socialists, and also originally from Finland, but also living now in Brussels. I would like to continue about the very important points raised by Maria in this excellent study that we have very closely been also looking into at the Young European Socialists. So when we speak about the youth political participation in EU or any other election, it usually always boils down to the voter turnout of young people. Often, of course, there's huge difference geographically, but often young people vote less, and also traditional political parties, not only our movement, but all of the, let's say, old political parties, they attract less and less young members. So, of course, when we speak about political participation, it's not just the voting, it's about everything else. In order for any group, is it women, is it minorities, is it young people, to be truly involved, you have to be involved in all of the parts of the political process, right? So you have to be also, there has to be a possibility to get elected, there has to be a possibility to get important positions within the party structures, within NGO life, within all of the levels of our democratic system. So I would kind of repeat the question, like what would be, in a wider sense, if we don't only speak about the voting, what would be your ways of integrating the young generation and the millennial generation into the whole decision-making process better? Thank you.
Yes, very well. So, Gesine, last words, then I will conclude, because we need to conclude, but tell us.
What can we do that the voice of the young people are heard? This remembered me an old title of Albert Hirschman, Voice and Exit and Participation. And that means, first of all, the young people have to claim to be heard and to make proposals themselves, right? It's not just for us to even the way, but that they have to do it. But of course, that leads to a very fundamental question, what democracy means. It is not just summing up voices. It is not just participation. It is tied, if it has to work, it is tied to an idea of a very old-fashioned term of a common good, because you speak about women, you speak about young generation, elder generation, sick people, very strong people, etc. And to find a democracy means, or to practice a democracy means that you find mechanisms to deliberate. For instance, the digital way that you think, well, democracy will be strengthened if you push a button. No. It's not just to push a button. It is to exchange arguments and the reasons for the arguments and the justice argument, etc. That means to create focus in order really to exchange your opinions, your interests, etc., but to exchange a variety of perspective, diversity, and to find out what could be a common denominator, a positive common denominator in order to be sustainable, right? This is what we have to find. All these preconditions of a working democracy have a little bit been forgotten, because one thinks just, well, you have to be strong on your interests. That's not sufficient. It's also a culture. It's, for instance, a culture of fairness. If you are not fair with the argument of the other, you can't really find such a common denominator. So it's a large entity. But I am totally optimistic that younger people have, to a large extent, in a way, instinctively understood that also, although in the universities that is not even with political sciences, that it's not very often taught, because it belongs to a kind of philosophical grounding of political procedures, which seems to be outmoded, old-fashioned, but which is essentially necessary. The same, I would say, for the digital work. What you need accompanying this digital innovation, and I have tried to learn a lot about this artificial intelligence, is how to build my own judgment on that. It's not only to separate fake news of good news and information, but to evaluate it, to find what is more important, what is less important. This is a total constant exchange of experience. And what I would suggest, I think the question was also asked to me from the side, the young people have new perspectives, new experience, much more knowledge on all that digital work, which I won't learn anymore. But the elder one have, if they are open, experience. And experience counts too. And you have your experience too. To be open in the exchange of experience, in the cooperation of the mind and mood of cooperation, is the best way to really then practice participation. And just claim it. Do it. Ask for it, and the elderly will a little bit follow.
Very well. I'm afraid that now we need to conclude, because I'm being told that we need to conclude. That's why we cannot have more. Very quick, because yes, very quick, because we really need to conclude. We have the organizers asking me to conclude.
The mic.
And I need to say something.
Sorry, guys, I need to ask you and put on the table a few. So sorry, I can't speak in English with you.
No, I'm sorry. You need to be quick.
Yes, I'm going to be quick. Hello, everybody. I'm Claudia. I'm not in the party, but I'm really glad that you have a space to speak. People from outside the party, and also people from outside Europe, but live in Europe. I have questions like, I'm going to be directed, so sorry, but I'm ally, okay? Who are you considering Europeans? Because, for example, in Portugal, I know that kids that was born and raised here, but their parents are not European by blood, they are not considered Portuguese, not Europeans. And what about the migration, the history of Europe that you know much better than me, but is also about migration process and between inside these countries. And if you are considering those people, they have roots from outside, but have economic participation in Europe. And what about the strike of women, if the government are going to support that? Tomorrow is going to have the national meeting in Porto about the strike, women in Portugal. And I have much more questions, like when Portugal are going to give back the piece of arts from the South America on Africa, as France is starting to do it.
Yes, but
yes, it's a lot of questions, because we are talking about, can I can I change my future and progressive ways to European Union? And for me, these all are connected, and I'm really sorry that I didn't have the same space to put this on the table and to be doing this reflections with you guys, because I'd really like to share and to listen what do you think about it, and how the young Europeans are thinking about it, how we can decolonize the practice, because yesterday was a very nice chat and seminar about the women, but we are talking about the representative, and was very embarrassing because in the end was closed with old guy white men talking and being applauded, being just doing what he is supposed to do, you know, just being our side. And I have lots of questions and reflections, and I'm really sorry that we don't have time for that.
Well, look, your comment only shows one thing.
Thank you.
That for sure we need to have much more time to go on this talk. Absolutely. So we need to find another way to go on with this talk. And I would like to say that this was, as I said at the beginning, just an appetizer. We show that we can have an in-depth dialogue between different generations. And I think that in order to conclude, I need to tell you a small story which happened in this building some days ago, or some years ago, in fact, when we were surrounded by a revolution, a democratic revolution. I need to tell you that by that time I was a teenager myself, and we were there, a lot of teenagers, and we received leaders coming from another generation. And the leaders came to the room, and they told us the following: look, there is a revolution out there, everything will change, we count on you to be active, and so we invite you to come with new ideas how to transform your school. And I need to tell you what was our response. We said, well, we want to transform our school, but we want much more. We want to transform our country. And this was the starting day for us to go everywhere in the country and to work with all the others to transform the country. And then we start transforming also Europe. So I'm telling this story because I know this young generation has this scale of ambition. And we need to find a way to work with you exactly with this scale of ambition. And that's why today this was just an appetizer. In any case, many thanks to the speakers here, many thanks to the speakers over there, and I will ask you to join us now. Join us here.
And many thanks to you.
I'm without voice.